Spiral dynamics and the Hawkins scale. What are the similarities? Let's compare. Are they compatible? Hello, this is Chris speaking. Wake up with a video about spiral dynamics and the Hawkins scale of consciousness. In spiral dynamics, we have 6 colors of personality development from beige to green in the first tier, and then 6 colors of finding and liberating the soul in the second tier. The first 3 colors, yellow, turquoise and coral, have been described well. The last 3 colors, teal, plum and aubergine, or violet, ultraviolet and clear light, as Ken Wilber calls it, have not been described much. And then we have the Hawkins scale of consciousness by David Hawkins, which is from 0 to 1000, where 0 is no consciousness and 1000 is the highest consciousness human beings can stand. And below 200 is negative emotions like fear and guilt and greed, and above 200 are positive experiences like courage and reason, and then more and more consciousness like enlightenment. And here many people stop describing after 700. 700 plus is not much described because it's very, very rare. But the Hawkins scale doesn't stop at 700 like it's often taught. It goes up to 1000. So let's see if we can find any similarities. So if you are on the Hawkins scale below 200, then you must be centered in a first tier color. Beige, purple, red, blue, orange or green. You can also be, that's the first difference, you can also be centered in a first tier color between 200 and 400 on the Hawkins scale, except beige. Beige can only exist below 200 because beige is only occupied with the personal survival. So there's no beige above 200. And this gives new meaning to beige, because for Claire Graves, beige was a theoretical color, but now we see on the Hawkins scale the lowest 3 states of consciousness of fear, shame and guilt. So if you're totally taken over by fear, shame or guilt, then you may be even in beige, centered in. The majority of humanity is around 200 on the Hawkins scale, and around blue, orange in spiral dynamics. So if you're centered in blue, it would make sense that you calibrate around 200 on the Hawkins scale. But it is possible for purple, blue, orange and green to be between 200 and 400 as well, but not above 400. Red is a bit more complicated, but it usually also stops at 200. It can go a little bit beyond 200, but not much. So for the first tier colors, 400 is the limit. And for the second tier colors, they start after 200, beyond 200. Yellow usually starts between 250 and 300 and upwards. And turquoise starts between 300 and 400, but often is around 400. So many spiritually interested people between 200 and 400 will be either in green, yellow or turquoise centered in. After 400 it gets interesting, because after 400 there's the possibility of awakening. And people who wake up, or to whom waking up happens, they're usually centered in either turquoise or coral. Coral usually takes place between 400 and 500 on the Hawkins scale. So here 400 to 500, the awakening area is either turquoise or coral. So they take up, these two colors take up the same space in the Hawkins scale, but turquoise is a more positive experience and coral is a more negative experience, to sum it up in a few words, in a nutshell. And while yellow cannot get beyond 500, turquoise and coral can. So beyond 500, you can still remain centered in turquoise or coral, but what often happens is that you slip into teal or violet, as Ken Wilber calls it. So between 500 and 600, it's most often teal violet, which is a great similarity between Hawkins scale and spiral dynamics. So spiral dynamics describes consciousness until 600 in the Hawkins scale, until about 600. But it is further developed, it has been and is in the process of being developed further. So there are two more colors in the second tier, which some people call plum and aubergine and some people call ultraviolet and clear light. Between 600 and 700, it's usually those two colors, plum and aubergine, or ultraviolet and clear light. Around 600, the shift from teal to plum can happen. And around 650, the shift from plum to aubergine can happen. But the second tier ends at 700. Second tier goes from around 250 to 700 on the Hawkins scale, where the first tier goes from 0 to 400 on the Hawkins scale. But the Hawkins scale doesn't stop at 700. It goes up to 1000. So there's the possibility of something that has been discussed sometimes in advanced spiral dynamics circles, that there might be a third tier. But what could be the third tier? If the first tier of spiral dynamics is about personality development, and the second tier is about finding and liberating the soul, what could be the third tier about? And here the Hawkins scale can give us many clues, because beyond 700 plus, the individuality, both personality-wise and spirituality-wise, is completed. There's nothing more to complete after 700. So what is left? What is left is the collective aspect, humanity, or the planet, or the universe. Beyond 700 is merging with the divine and being a true servitor of the divine consciousness and doing something that benefits everyone and everything. It's not about you anymore, not even about your soul. It's about the collective. So if you look at people who calibrated at 700 plus, you can watch my last video about examples of who calibrated where in history. Then you see that every one of those did something outstanding for humanity. They were absolutely selfless people who were only giving, and their only aim was to improve the conditions of humanity as a whole. Up to a point where they even started spiritual movements or even religions, and thus changed history and the whole course of humanity. The whole development, they speeded up the development of the masses, sped up evolution, human evolution. So there are quite a few similarities between the Hawkins scale and spiral dynamics, and also some differences. But these differences bring more texture and color, more 3D and 4D feeling to the whole thing. To use both of these scales is very fruitful in my experience. And thank you to Tony, who recommended the teachings of David Hawkins to me about 2 years ago. And since then I've been exploring it and found it very useful. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me as a patron. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you soon.